Correct, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Is everybody happy for me to sign those off? Good, thank you very much. I will do that. The only remark I have to make is to welcome our new chair, who's sitting conveniently opposite me. Mark Smith has been appointed to take over as chair of ARAC. As you all know, the chair of ARAC is the one independent member of the Combined Authority, and although he and I are not voting members of ARAC, I don't think in the 5 years I've been here we've ever had to have a vote. Mark has come from an incredible background in terms of PwC, knows Birmingham incredibly well. So let me just throw it open to Mark if you want to say any words. You'll be taking the meeting over really from tomorrow, really, if I can get away with it.
I think it might be Friday actually, but yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, David. Delighted to be taking on this role. As David said, I have enjoyed a long career with PricewaterhouseCoopers based here in the Midlands, which finishes tomorrow after 36 years. I'm an auditor by background. That's what I did for a living for most of that time. But I'm also very proud to come from the West Midlands. I've lived here since the age of 11. So I went to school here, disappeared off to university, but saw the error of my ways and have come back. Spent a lot of time in audit committees representing PwC, but also more recently, I was also on the West Midlands Growth Company and chaired the Audit and Risk Committee there. For the last 4 years, I've had the privilege of being the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee for the Royal Shakespeare Company down in Stratford-upon-Avon, and absolutely delighted to have been invited to take on this role. I have a huge love for the West Midlands and all that it is, and if I can contribute to that in a small way going forward, I'm absolutely delighted to be able to do so. So doing a lot of familiarisation at the present time, getting to know the organisation and the people. Had a lot of really helpful induction meetings, which Satish and the team have organised, including with Linda. But yes, really looking forward to taking on the job from the end of this week, and probably also to thank David for the really helpful session we had together as you are transitioning out the role as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Satish, where's Satish gone?
I'm here.
Satish, do you want to say anything as the monitoring officer, bearing in mind you were leading the your team were leading the appointment of Mark?
No, just to say that well, I have to sort of be careful about this, not to sort of butter up in a sense, right? But no, Mark is in many ways, David. I think I'm sure Linda will sort of agree with this, that in terms of the stage of development where the CA is at the moment, it's a natural transition to somebody like yourself in the early stages to somebody like Mark, because I think we've gone past the stage of, in a sense, developing, just setting up systems and so forth. We need to get to the next stage, which is to sort of take an umbrella view around some of the corporate governance risk and management issues. So I think Mark, with his experience of sort of auditing quite large entities of one form or the other, will hopefully be able to bring that to the sort of party. So no, we're sort of sorry to see you go. I'm sure Linda will agree with that, but equally sort of happy to have Mark on board, and sort of it will manage that seamless transition.
Thank you, Satish. I fully endorse. I think it is entirely appropriate now that we have somebody who has a much more of an audit background taking forward, because many of the systems are in place. And I think it's right now that the ARAC has somebody at the top of the organisation who absolutely understands his way around. So that's a very good move. Right, moving on. We have to consider the appointment of the Vice Chair. I am aware of only one nomination. Can I just check around the room and on the screen? I have a nomination from Councillor to my left, Ram, who is the current Vice Chair, to stand again. Is there anybody else who wishes to be considered? I will take that as silence. And can I therefore ask for everybody's approval that Ram takes on the role again for another year?
Agreed.
Yes, Jade.
Congratulations, Ram. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for being on the side.
Thank you very much, Rob. Right, we have the forward plan that we need to look at now. In normal circumstances, I would be going through the forward plan in terms of the various issues that I thought were current. What I'm going to recommend is that this is taken as read in the paper that's here, but to suggest to you that Mark, in his role as chair during his induction, will almost certainly be wanting to look at the areas that we've covered in recent past and be asking for some additions to that forward plan. Are you happy to delegate to your new chair the adaptation of this forward plan as he takes on the role and starts to understand what the issues are?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair, yeah.
Okay, so your first accountability one. All right, and Wendy, could I ask you to minute that Mark will review, and I suggest that you review this within the next month, so that well and truly before the next meeting, a clear forward plan is in place, which is owned by the new chair. Mark, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to item 7. The COVID update, employee health and wellbeing, new ways of working. Is Melanie here? Yes, Mel's here. Yes, done there. We have a good paper. Mel, do you want to just quickly summarise this and then throw open the floor to any questions?
Thank you, Chair. So just picking up on the impact of COVID, what I've tried to outline in the report is the impact on sickness absence. So relatively low sickness absence across the authority, and low sickness absence in relation to COVID in self-isolation. That's really attributable to the majority of people in the authority being able to work from home, the shielding employees returning to work earlier this year, and we've had relatively low levels of COVID-related absence. So in terms of impact, we've been able to remain productive, and we've still got a loss of COVID-related absence during July and August, so that trend has continued. I think it's fair to say that we've had a focus on health and wellbeing through our health and wellbeing buddies and also the various health and wellbeing groups, and we've remained a focus on ensuring manager support and relative toolkits so that people can be supported to work from home and to work remotely. And that focus really has continued as we've looked at our new ways of working. So you'll see the section of report called our #WOW21. So that's our programme with introducing people back to the workplace, back to Summer Lane. And I think it's fair to say that there has been a focus on ensuring that people have the support and the guidance in order to do that. Over the last 3 weeks, we've seen a return back to Summer Lane. And I think it's fair to say that teams are now transitioning so that they will work a combination of from home and also from the office. We're not quite there yet, I don't think, with all of the teams returning back, but we're well under our way. So any questions?
Thank you, Mel. Can I firstly look to the screen to see if there's anybody got any questions? If anybody has questions, can you put your video camera on so I know that you have? Right, so there's nobody there. In fact, Grant's gone, so he's definitely no question. Right, looking around the room, has anybody got any questions on Mel's paper? No. Mel, the one question I've got is, I think it would be helpful, and this will relate to where Pete will come in a moment on health and safety. The issue that doesn't come out in your paper is mental health and mental well-being, and I know it'll be covered on the health and safety side of it. Do you want to just comment on how we're looking after that?
Yeah, so we've introduced a new stress and resilience toolkit. We've also introduced a number of toolkits for managers, and we've also focused on health and wellbeing in our leadership forums as well. So yeah, I probably should have covered it in the paper, but there has been a significant focus on mental health in particular.
Okay, I think what would be helpful going forward is health and safety is the safety net under which we will catch it, and are we just looking to make sure we've sorted it? I think as part of the practice side of it, it really should be lassoed into your remit in terms of updating Harry.
Yep.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yep. Right. Is everybody happy to sign off on this particular paper, bearing in mind the comment I've just made? Looking for any dissent or comment on the screen? All right, thank you very much, Mel. So moving on, very neatly, Pete. Pete Bond is here instead of Ben. Pete actually is the person who is ultimately accountable for the health and safety side of it. And I remember, it must be 2 years ago, time has gone rather unusually, that you were starting off the health and safety remit with the type of look that says, how come I ended up with this? I think it's come on, personally, I think it's come on incredibly well. And I feel that the organisation is in a much stronger place. But would you like to just quickly summarise where we are?
Thank you, Chair. We're also joined online by Ben Gittings, who has undertaken a huge amount of work in this space. I think partly I should explain to the committee that one of the abilities to move away from that look of how did I end up with this has been the fact that we have the supporting capability of a health and safety team headed by Ben within the organisation as well. So if I could, Chair, I'll pass over to Ben because he's also undertaken a huge amount of the hard work through this pandemic to briefly summarise that for the group, and then we're happy to pick up on questions and comments.
Right, thank you, Ben. Hello there, Ben. And by the way, in case you missed it, I was congratulating the team on the progress that's been made. So don't fumble the ball now.
I'll try not to. Good morning, all. In terms of our coronavirus response in the last 18 months, that's very much shaped our strategy and delivery plan for this next financial year, as we sort of look at the safety challenges and opportunities presented by this new normal. It's not been a wasted experience. Everything we've learned has put us in a good position as we rapidly move towards a hybrid working model. We're actively working on several areas of focus to ensure we can maintain our high standards of health and safety. Detail within the report, you'll note a number of key achievements. Much of our time has been allocated to COVID response. However, any other time we've had, we've endeavoured to utilise this to implement enhancements to our safety management system. We continue to work in line with our annual delivery plan for this financial year. We've split our objectives across the 5 distinctive priority areas of leadership, management of risk, communication, engagement, training and competence, performance management. In the leadership area, a key area of focus for us will be to be able to have leadership that can lead and promote a culture, which is a key requirement of the ISO 45001 standard. There's been significant changes within the senior leadership within the organisation, so we just need to ensure that we can carry on with the good practices that we've seen to date. In terms of management of risk, we'll be undertaking a comprehensive gap analysis to make sure all risks are effectively managed. And there'll be a significant focus there on programme delivery. As an organisation, we have large amounts of capital programmes going on, which will continue to grow over the years. So we need to make sure those construction risks continue to be effectively managed. Communication engagement will also be key as we move away from fixed workplaces, which obviously used to form a key area of place to actually deliver health and safety messaging. We have to look at this hybrid model now. We just need to make sure that our communication is actually more robust and actually gets the message across. Also in communication engagement, we'll be looking to further links with partners, stakeholders and equivalent organisations. This will be essential to share best practice and enable benchmarking exercises to take place. Training and competence. We look to further develop our health and safety training matrix to ensure all colleagues are provided with necessary training to undertake their roles. We've also got the learning pool platform now, which we're using rather than our previous health and safety platform, which brings us into line with the rest of the organisation. And finally, performance management. The key area here will be health and safety governance arrangement. We need to make sure they remain appropriate. And a recent example where we're doing a significant amount of work, and this is for Metro, with reports to be issued shortly in that area. Also within the report, you will note an update on Wellbeing. This programme is generally led by Anna Smuglu and her team, but we work closely alongside us just to make sure that those things that have been identified in the last 18 months, such as mental health, work-life balance and musculoskeletal health, are addressed with us, with them as well, just so we get the maximum benefit of the organisation.
Thank you for that, Ben. Right, can I quickly check on the screen, has anybody got any questions or points they want to raise? Right, you think you've got away with it there, Ben. Can I just check around the room? Has anybody got any questions? Because I'm going to, in a moment, check whether everybody's happy to sign this off as our annual report. Again,
Jack, can I understand on the financial implications, because there's no figures in it, 'cause obviously with the pandemic, there must be extra, somewhere, some kind of cost attached to make sure everything is separated and so on for health and safety. I didn't see any figures around it, so I'm thinking, is there somewhere tackled in the paper somewhere which I may have missed? And also in somewhere the word is psychological health. I thought that was the same as mental health, is it? Or unless I don't understand it. Somewhere there is psychological health. Is it same or it's different and stuff? Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. So 2 questions. Let's pass the financial one. Pete, do you want to just pick up on that one? Any financial implications here? And if so, what are they?
Yes, Chair. I mean, in terms of the financial assessment for each of these areas, they're largely carried out within the business activities that are undertaken within across the organisation. So there are no direct implications in terms of the health and safety budget. However, one of the things to be noted is from the report, of course, we have increased the resource as well to support health and safety, which has had an incremental cost in terms of personnel to support it. But we have been working with the relevant teams and business areas. So some of those areas that Mel referred to in terms of the adaptation of business, then there are budget elements within those ways of working to support that activity. And of course, they have a health and safety implication. We're involved in those, but that's not directly attributable to the health and safety budget itself.
Thank you, Pete. Linda?
Yeah. So we've been monitoring since the start of the pandemic all additional spend that we've been incurring as a result of the COVID pandemic, which will include the alterations we've had to make to this building, etc. So what we can do is share a summary round after the committee in terms of what's been spent. It's clearly been accommodated within existing resources, so we've had to make savings through our productivity and efficiencies to accommodate those additional costs. We have been keeping a tight control of that, as you would expect, but we can certainly share that schedule that we've got around. It does feature in our financial monitoring report that goes through, but I'll share that separate schedule.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
On that particular one, Mark, you might want to consider whether you want ARAC to just have a view of the COVID financial effect in terms of long-term changes that have been made. Would you want to see that added into the forward plan?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Wendy, could you put into that then for a future meeting a report from Linda or Linda's team on what have been the financial implications, both capital and revenue? Thank you. And then the final question that Ram raised was regarding the use of the word psychological. Is that mental health? And I think I would assume it to be, but is that right?
If I may, Chair, yes, that's correct, but also because some of the guidance that's come out from government as well throughout the pandemic has also referred to mental health issues and psychological health issues. If I may, Chair, just to add on to the point that was raised on the previous report from HR as well, then actually one of the areas that Ben and the team worked quite strongly on was to ensure throughout the pandemic, because we also saw some impacts to psychological health, mental health for individuals across the combined authority. And one of the things that we worked very proactively to do was to risk manage and assess that. And we actually we ensured that we had the working space available in compliance with government standards and guidance to also enable those people that were in difficult positions and suffering on as a result of that to be able to work within the workplace environment as well. Well managed within the COVID rules and guidance, but actually it was a significant piece of work to ensure that everybody was supported, whether it was to keep them remotely or to actually bring them into a place of work to be able to carry out their functions effectively and support their mental health needs as well.
Thank you, Pete. Ben, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just finally on that point, one of the things that we'll be planning to do in the next year is look at the benefits of obtaining the 45003 standard. That's a new standard that's been brought in to look at the psychological risks as part of the health and safety management system. So it sits alongside the 45001 standard, and that's something we'll be working closely with Anna and her team on, seeing whether we should establish that to formalise our good arrangements we've got in place within the organisation.
Thank you, Ben. Mel, do you want to add anything?
No, nothing else.
Okay, thanks. Ram, is that all right?
That's fine.
2 questions from me, if I may. Because we returned to work after quite a gap, that would have meant there's a number of people were out of they won't have been working with health and safety issues for some time. What was the route you used to be confident that everybody was up to standard with health and safety issues, especially with public transport?
Happy to come in on that one. In terms of different mechanisms, in terms of people from across the workplace, one of the things we've been looking at is training and support and capability to ensure that people are aware. In terms of the wider public transport network, we've been looking at an element of risk assessment and risk matrix, which has been undertaken for all individuals who have had to undertake employment duties in different places and spaces. And of course, because of the responsibilities of transport for West Midlands, of which in an area where I carry a dual role, then we've also been looking very carefully at the responses to people in use of public transport network and how we support that. And actually for individuals within the team and myself, I recall my own experience the first day I caught the train back in and didn't drive, and my own areas of concern and anxiety around it. And other team members have felt a similar position, and we've sort of evolved some of that anecdotal areas, but also we've worked very carefully on the risk assessment and risk management with individuals across the organisation, and a process that Ben has put in place to keep those up to date and follow that they're kept up to date.
Okay, thank you. Ben, I think it would be helpful if you don't mind, if there was a small supplement for to this paper for the records that just records all the work that's gone on with regard to return to work, especially around the transport system, to ensure that health and safety, everybody understood where we were on health and safety, and they'd had a type of refresh, whatever that needed to be.
Certainly, Chair, I'm happy to provide that.
But I think we should be more explicit for the record. Is that all right, both of you? Okay, final one, and you and I had discussed this. Can you give ARAC confidence that with the change in accountabilities within the Combined Authority, because prior to this, your accountability was through to the Accounting Officer for Health and Safety, which was the Chief Executive of MML, who sat on the senior leadership team, who is now the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority. That means that the flow of accountability is slightly different. That doesn't appear in any of the paperwork, as far as I can see, not in here, but in terms of the way health and safety is held accountable. How are you coping with that, and how is that now being made clear?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the changing governance arrangements with the Managing Director of Transport for West Midlands now being the interim Chief Executive of the Combined Authority, and also we have the Director of Resilience, who is now the interim Managing Director of Transport for West Midlands. So that's something that, from a health and safety perspective, Ben and I have been cognizant of introducing some temporary approaches, and that's because of the interim arrangements. And that is around the way in which we brief both of those roles to support, to ensure that we are identifying if we feel there are any potential conflict issues or lack of accountabilities within the structure. I think what will be important for us as the organisation, as the CA moves towards the permanent role arrangements, is to ensure that we have then captured that in the governance review that that Ben spoke about, to see that we can clearly identify any areas. And one of the specific areas in there that we are mindful of is Metro and the governance of Metro arrangements as well.
Thank you very much, Ben. Satish, I think as monitoring officer, I would like to see a clear paper trail of the temporary accountability changes with regard to health and safety, so that if ever, God forbid, there was a health and safety executive follow through on something, we have in place a clarity as to who is accountable for what in this particular temporary situation. Could you help Ben and Pete make sure that that moves up the priority scale? It can fall away the instant we have permanent appointments, but for the moment, I'd like to be confident that as monitoring officer, we have something in place that deals with those temporary changes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Could I be comfortable that in as far as the minutes are concerned, that is in place by the end of next week? I don't think it's a particularly lengthy exercise, but I'd like to see that accountability much clearer. Yeah.
It's just a statement in terms of the current position.
And it's also all the people who now own it have just signed that, saying that so that if anything ever happened, everybody can see there has been a temporary change and that everybody owns it. Pete? All right, can I just check with colleagues then?
I really wanted to comment around the mental health issues, because let's not forget that Combined Authority launched Thrive well before we had the COVID epidemic. I don't think you can separate out psychology and psychiatric work and mental health, because they're part of the same thing. Certainly psychology can help with mental well-being and emotional well-being. It can also help for people who have been diagnosed with psychiatric conditions. I'm a governor of the Mental Health Trust and also a manager under the Mental Health Act. So psychology and psychiatric work is very, very important, but it's all part of a continuum. I don't think you can separate them out.
Thank you. Mel, do you want to add anything?
No, nothing to add.
Please. No. Okay, so the action there is, can we be clear, Ben, in our reporting in the future that we pick up on the point that's just been made?
Certainly, yes. Yes, Chair.
So can I please quickly check with colleagues on screen as well as here? Are we prepared to sign off on this update with the points that I had made and the point that's just been rightly made regarding mental health?
Agreed.
Yes. Good. Okay, thank you very much. So I am now moving to the internal audit update. I don't think that we have the head of audit, Peter Farrow here. I think we have. Oh, we do have Peter here. You will look like you were out of office for some time. Okay, Peter, are you and Sandra leading this, or is it just you?
Myself and Sandra, David.
Okay. All right, if you'd like to take over and talk us through the various bits, I think there are a couple of key papers that are here. Can I leave you to talk us through how you see fit?
Sure, thank you. Since this is our latest update report for the committee, and I'm not sure if there are any new committee members, but just as a refresh, at the start of the year, we agree an internal audit plan with ARAC. Throughout the year, we complete those reviews, update ARAC, and then at the end of the year, as the head of audit, that gives me the opportunity to give an opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Combined Authority's internal control, governance and risk management processes. Since we last met in June, we've completed 3 pieces of work, and they start to be detailed in the tables on page 26, I believe, of the pack. We've issued 2 reports on adult education budget, which is a big area, and GDPR. Both of those we've given a satisfactory level of assurance, which is good. And we've also completed, but it's only at draft stage at the moment, our review of the corporate complaints process, but all the indicators are that that will also be a satisfactory level of assurance, and we'll bring that report back in November. But as you can see, and below that, the rest of the table identifies the reviews that we intend to bring to ARAC in November, January and the remainder of the year. And I think those that are scheduled for November, we've got the field work underway, and those for January, we started to plan those out already. What we've agreed with ARAC for a while now is that we will, append full reports where we make a certain number of AMBER recommendations. So today, appended to our progress report, you've got the full audit review reports on GDPR and on the adult education budget. And apologies, because I do appreciate that they are quite long, lengthy reports. The GDPR one, you might notice, we took a slightly different approach than doing a traditional internal audit review. The Information Commissioner's Office does have a checklist, 4 steps guidance for data controllers, and we thought that we would self-assess, benchmark the CA against that, and that would be a sort of a more focused review than doing a traditional internal audit review. And I think that's worked out well. When you have a look at that report, you'll see that in most of those sort of controls, the CA were meeting what would be expected by the ICO. There were just a small number of areas where we felt that those could be extended or possibly built on and improved. But as I've mentioned, they are quite lengthy reviews. We won't go through them in detail, but I'll hand over to my colleague Sandra Callian now, who completes the majority of the work at the CA, and she'll just give you a feel for some of the issues that we came across. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you. So I'll start with the adult education budget report. This was our first audit of this area, so it's very much a baseline audit, and we covered the core performance management arrangement and payment arrangement, and we found, on the whole, the processes undertaken by productivity and skills for the management of the budget, the performance delivery, monitoring and payment processes, which is based on an extensive data validation process, to be robust. We picked up 3 amber areas, one relating to the retention of contracts once awarded, which lay with legal services, who have already started to take action to address those issues. So those should be resolved going forward. The second item was about financial records and just the retention of the approval that had been provided by the Section 151 officer. It was a matter of making sure that that was recorded within the CA's financial records. Again, that should be in place now as well, and we can look for assurance when we start the key financial systems in about a week's time. The other amber was related to the local assurance framework, where a separate document was required to cover the adult education budget, which will be addressed by the CA in due course as part of the overall single assurance framework document. Raised 2 green issues. That was for productivity and skills to further enhance the governance of the payments group that has been established, and also the risk management approach, which was in place, but just to integrate the various processes that they have. There is quite an extensive list of good practice areas, which I won't go into detail, but we found governance arrangements to be robust in terms of the oversight the senior management had, the involvement of the director of the Productivity and Skills Directorate and the Section 151 officer. Again, liaison between productivity and skills and finance was clearly established, which provided a level of assurance regarding confirming that services had been delivered, training had been delivered, plus that payments were made appropriately and in accordance with the contracts. Again, we've covered contracts and agreements and how they clearly referenced the performance management arrangements. Again, then we go into detail about the performance management arrangements. There's a clear framework in place. Monitoring reviews were clearly evident and undertaken on a very regular basis, notwithstanding COVID. In fact, there was more regular contact with private providers, in fact, on a daily basis at certain points. We also looked at the risk management arrangements. Both productivity and skills and WMCA Finance undertake risk assessments of providers and due diligence to ensure that any issues that are arising can be addressed promptly. We've also we've covered the national assurance framework. The building blocks that should be in place to provide assurance are there. Is the amber is about having the document in place, which is required by the national framework. Again, we've covered the audit assurance arrangements, where a third party has permission to undertake site visits to providers, similar in the same methodology as the ESFA would, which provides additional assurance on delivery of the budget. Again, there is an extensive data collection validation process, which I won't go to in detail, but it integrates with the ESFA's own data validation. So that gives additional assurance, as well as the CA's own data validation that they've established. Again, provider payment arrangements found to be robust. The preparation of payments, the confirmation of payments, the approval was all found satisfactory. The next section covers the recommendations. One about the retention of signed contracts and inclusion of execution dates. Again, that's addressed to legal services and is already in hand. The next one was for finance, in terms of just evidencing the approval within the financial records, which sit outside of productivity and skills. And again, we can get assurance quickly on that at the key financials that are commencing shortly. And again, the National Local Growth Assurance Framework to ensure that that document is in place and we're compliant with the framework. The green's largely related to the payment group that's been set up that provides that challenge and monitoring of and approval of payments. And that's just to set up the, sorry, that's the next one, set up terms of reference, and then bringing together the two risk assessment processes that are in place between finance and productivity skills, just to give a more integrated approach. So those are enhancements. If there's any questions on AB, we're happy to take them now before we move on to GDPR.
Can I check if Linda, you want to say something?
Just wanted to say from my perspective, I think I really welcome this report. This is a new area for the combined authority, and we have tried very hard to get the governance and controls in place and right. And I think this is providing me with a very useful assurance that actually what we've done is robust, and it's given us a couple of indications about where we need to tighten things. But actually, on the whole, I think a really positive report. So I just want to thank Sandra really for giving us that independent assurance on it.
Thank you. Can I check if there are any other questions? Just looking around, anything on the screen? No?
Just, I think this is I think I follow Linda's point on this. It's probably in the report. They said auditors said auditors saying they need to review the whole process. I think somewhere in the document there's a recommendation, but that probably helps that way. But on the document here on page 28, there are two items which are not available. I'm just trying to figure out what's behind it. Why were not available? It's human resources, employment, and also the accessible transport services, if that's possible.
That's going back from some of the education budget, Peter. So I think it's referring to the programme.
Are those the two audits that we still need to finalise? Sorry, Sandra.
Sorry, I think, is that in reference to the follow-up table? That's on page, that is on page 28. Yeah. That's the programme of follow-ups that are due to be done, and I can see that accessible transport services is included in there on the forward plan.
Okay, so that would say it's in hand.
Yes, that's in the forward plan to be commenced as a follow-up in due course.
Okay, thank you. Lorraine, are you on screen somewhere?
I am. Sorry, David, just pressing buttons.
Okay, do you want to add anything?
No, we are continuing to monitor all the delivery of all of the recommendations. We are doing follow-ups, prioritising from dates of final recommendation delivery, and that will come in due course.
Okay, okay, thank you. Just one from me. I noticed that we have Jane Middleton from the Legal Services. Jane, could you just give ARAC some comfort and confidence regarding the availability of signed contracts, and that this wasn't this was a one-off, and that in future we're on top of making sure we've got all the documents we need?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've now located all the contracts that were missing and all others, and they've been placed on a shared space, an electronic shared space. We also now have a lead solicitor who is coordinating the work in that area, so we're quite certain that this wouldn't happen again.
Thank you, Jane. And can I check with the FD here that you're going to be available in future to make sure that they can pin you down to sign things off?
I don't think I can guarantee that, but yeah. So essentially, what we've got, we've created the payment group essentially, which within the Constitution, The delegation for these payments is given to the relevant director for productivity and skills, the monitoring officer and the section 151 officer. So in order to do that efficiently, we've set up a payment group that gets all three of us on the same screen at on the same time with the team to take us through it. We can ask any questions at the time. So I think the issue is the minutes from that are what gives the approval, and I think what's happened is the minutes have followed later than the actual payment has then been done. So it's not been that actually that hasn't been approved, it's just the minutes have come forward later than the payment's been made. So we need to just make sure we get the minutes attached, done more quickly so that accounts payable have got them in their hands before they press go on payment.
Thank you, Linda. As any good auditor will tell you, it's the paperwork that counts. All right, so can I just check, is everybody content to accept? Yes?
I don't think mine's working.
No, just press it once.
That's it. Okay. I don't know whether this is the appropriate place to raise it. The Midland Metro and Corporation Street and the ripping up of tracks a few years after they were laid, I would have thought that would have been alarm bells would have rung about why it happened and an investigation to see whether controls are in place to prevent it from happening again. And I just wonder whether scrutiny are dealing with it, the scrutiny committee, whether we're dealing with it as the audit committee from an internal audit perspective. I just want to be reassured that lessons have been learned from what seems to me to be a pretty sorry state of affairs. I mean, I don't get many emails from constituents about the activities of the West Midlands Combined Authority, but I've had a number of people who are saying, what the hell's going on? Relatively recently laid track has now been ripped up and for whatever reason. I've tried to find out through my own endeavours as to exactly what went wrong, and the silence is deafening, and I just wondered whether anything internal has been done to try and learn lessons for the future to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you. It's not specifically relevant to this, but what I will do is to quickly check, is there anything you can comment on here?
So just to say, I was going to raise, this would have been an issue raised for the accounts essentially, because actually it was, it affected in terms of a potential impairment on the statutory accounts. But essentially, and Satish will come in on this, no doubt. Yes, we are. I think the Mayor has been quoted in terms of us undertaking an investigation into the reasons why we are having to undertake these repairs so soon after the implementation. Absolutely. Satish may want to come on around the work that we're doing.
Is it not the responsibility of internal audit though? I would have thought if the Mayor was calling for an investigation, it would have been the internal audit team that would have done it. Maybe I'm...
Initially there will be two approaches. First and foremost, line management would have to demonstrate that they were looking at it. And we would then decide whether or not that report was adequate. Until you had raised it, I was unaware of the particular issue because I'm not local.
If you lived in Birmingham, you wouldn't.
That's the advantage you've had. And I was about to toss the ball to him anyway. What I would say is, on the basis of you having raised it, and with Mark's permission, I think I should ask that this comes back for a clear update at the next ARAC meeting. What is happening? How are we actually approaching this investigation, and whether or not, from an internal audit point of view, we need to do any further work. I don't want to commission one yet. What I want to do is to hear what's actually happening. Let me just quickly check. Are you happy with that?
So I am, and Satish I think wants to just come in on that. So and that would be the plan. So essentially, we are doing that work internally as officers, obviously, and then it would be for us to report back, and I have no problem with us reporting here as to whether or not you're assured around that, and for you to then ask for any further work depending on what the conclusions are. But Satish, do you want to?
Yes, Chair, with your permission, I think Linda's right that we just need to be a little bit careful about where we are in the stage of this. Obviously, it's very difficult on the ground, but we just need to have the opportunity to investigate properly in terms of the contract and the contract management arrangements, and then consider any sort of arising liability issues. So I think it's probably best if we could sort of give us the time to do that, and then certainly sort of, if that requires further investigation by whatever process, certainly that can be pursued at a subsequent stage.
That's acceptable to me on condition of one thing, and that is that this is a formal topic of the next ARAC meeting, which is an update from the two of you as to where we are with that, because I think it's a very fair point that's been raised. I'd like ARAC to actually understand where the investigation's gone, and I think we can then form a view as to whether we wish to ask internal audit to do any further work. All right, and I'm eternally grateful for a local man having been appointed to replace me. Sorry.
Yeah, I trust officers implicitly, but I have to say I would like to see an independence of the managers or the team responsible for the initial work and the contract, etc. I think it would reassure us all that it was a robust inquiry. That's not to denigrate any individuals, but I just think that I would be more comfortable with internal audit doing it rather than the managers of the team that were responsible.
Okay, well, I think that's a very good recommendation, but I think it follows one after the line management getting themselves into position to understand and report back. And I think
you're more trusting than I am then.
No, not at all. I just don't think from a process point of view, we need to absolutely make sure that the line management can tell us where we are, and that the next ARAC meeting, subject to the chair's agreement, it may well be that one of the recommendations is that we ask for an independent investigation. But I think we probably need to get a better context, and that's why having it formally brought back to the ARAC meeting gives that opportunity for that discussion. Is that acceptable to you? Mark, you're okay with that?
Right.
Wendy, you might want to check that with me later, but I think that's covered. Satish, are you okay with that?
Yes, I'm happy with that. Absolutely.
Okay, this may well be heading your way, Peter, but we'll worry about that later. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Sorry, yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on that point, I understand that actually this could potentially be the subject of legal action as well, so we do need to be careful that we don't predicate or jeopardise any case that the combined the Midland Metro may have against particular contractors. I think it's the right point. There are effectively multiple stages to this. One, you've got that internal section potentially lining up any legal works that may be required with the contractor, and then you've also got the sort of more of the role of ARAC, which would be the lessons learned from that in respect of contracts, process, and scrutiny. And I think that the kind of two, we have to be careful that we don't overlap them too much, and that we may potentially hinder the combined authority's legal challenges potentially if required.
Both very fair points. Linda, you want to say something?
Yeah, just to reassure, the contract and the original construction was undertaken prior, obviously, to the sort of combined authority, and all of the officers that would have been involved in that at the time will no longer be here. So obviously we have a monitoring officer that is coming in completely independent and fresh to that position. We are obviously mindful of the points made around our legal position, and just to assure, the contract was completed under a construction contract, and actually it was pre the formation, from our perspective, of the Midland Metro Alliance. So we formed the Midland Metro Alliance. One of the things being around the difficulty we're having in terms of the contractor, getting the contractors to deliver metro construction. So it's actually pre the Midland Metro Alliance being set up that this happened. So we no longer procure and design or construct our metro network utilising the method that was used for that construction. But absolutely, all that will come back in terms of the report that we make.
I think I'm just going to, because it's slightly, close it down. I think what I'm very clear about is that we do need to have a formal report through to ARIC as to what has actually gone on and the process that's being used to investigate it. ARIC will then have the chance to consider whether or not a formal investigation needs to go to happen and whether that's independent or not. I don't think that we can take it any further than that at this particular point.
I just wanted to reassure you, the reason why I raised it was to learn lessons. I mean, you can't change the past, but what you can do is learn from it. That's the reason why I raised it.
Yep, and I think it's well raised, and I think it's entirely appropriate that it comes back. But we will stage it in the way that we've agreed, which is, let's be clear what the line management are doing initially. But ARIC will make a decision as to what it needs to do then following that. Okay, is everybody happy with that? Can I come back quickly and just check on the adult education budget? Is there anything else that we wish to comment or question regarding that? Okay, Sandra, can you move fairly quickly to the GDPR paper, bearing in mind that the not GDPR, what was it?
It was.
It was GDPR, thank you. The GDPR audit, it's relatively self-explanatory, so I don't think you need to talk us through in detail, but maybe just the overview.
Yes, so we use the ICO's checklist, and predominantly the areas were met by the Combined Authority and the DPO. We raised one amber, which sits with ICT regarding Cyber Essentials accreditation, which ICT have assured us will be applied for by the end of the October, and then it's a matter of assessment, and that should be in place. But it is not a mandatory requirement of GDPR, but it still needs to be considered and put in place. And then we have 9 green, which I won't go into detail, but they are predominantly enhancements of what is already there in terms of processes and what the DPO has put in place. And that's, in a nutshell, an overview of the report. But I understand the DPO is going to present their own report and may expand on those points.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm not going to allow questions at this point because we've got Gurmit, who's about to talk us through the GDPR update or the data protection update, and then I'll take questions on both of those issues as they're clearly very joined. Gurmit, again, a nice piece of work, a real advance on where we were. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The committee will recall that in June of this year, we presented a paper on data protection and COVID working. So I won't go over that ground again. That paper particularly focused on how we were coping regards data protection and the situation of the vast majority of staff working from home. As we move forward, the next challenge or step for us is really to adjust to hybrid working, where we will see a mixture of remote and office-based working, and we'll need to address the challenges that will present in terms of monitoring and ensuring compliance with data protection legislation. Since June, we've had the benefit of the audit, which the previous item has just discussed, and that was a comprehensive going through the ICO's, Information Commissioners' checklist of what they expect for compliance with data protection. The audit has recommended a number of enhancements to what we are already doing, and we'll be putting those in place. Work has already started on that. A couple of areas that I would like to sort of raise with the committee that we are particularly keen to advance on and improve on. The first one is to ensure that we establish a data protection standard that we are working towards. This will be a real enhancement, particularly for the committee, because it will set a measure to what we are looking to meet. And the recommendation of both myself as Data Protection Officer and the Information Risk Security Officer is that the government security standard should be adopted by the Combined Authority, and that will then set out a number of areas that we are required to meet, and then we can in turn report upon to yourselves. The second area that we're really looking to move on is our processes for information breach reporting and management. This is a key area because what GDPR brought about was extremely tight timescales of 72 hours by which a report, which is reportable to the Information Commissioner, must be reported. So that presents a number of challenges, and what we have recognised is that we need to improve on our processes there. So work is now started on addressing that and seeing how we can advance on that. And members will have noted that on page 64 of their pack, I have detailed the types of breaches that we have seen. And it has to be said that the numbers are quite small, but they essentially focus around three areas. One is human error, and that is essentially a mistake by a member of staff. And that is something which we really look to address in two ways. Firstly, by having processes and checks and balances in place to avoid them. And secondly, through obviously training and awareness across the organisation. The second area was in relation to new IT and new processes. And this is an area where the legislation really requires what's called privacy by design, and that is where you essentially conduct data privacy impact assessments before any new processes, particularly IT, is put into place. And that is something that we do, and we will continue to do and continue to work on improving. And the third area is obviously the management of data processes that we use and where breaches may happen with partners who we are dependent on delivering services. We're also looking going forward to significantly improve the monitoring of processing across the organisation, and this is, I think, is a key area, particularly as we are over the last year and the year that's to come, changing the way in which working patterns are conducted with no longer a sort of mass office-based operation. So those are the areas that we're looking to work upon. And that really is a summary of the update, and it really feeds off the paper that was presented in June this year. If there are any questions from the committee, I'd be happy to take those.
I've only got one relating to the breaches where it's human error. There's a figure of 62%. Is that 62% of a small number, or was it a much larger number that we should be concerned about?
It is of a small number. In terms of reported data breaches, we are really in very low double figures. So that's the overall total. So the 62% is a percentage of quite a low total of reported breaches. Now, what I would suspect is as we move to a more improved breach reporting mechanism and process, the number of breaches that are reported will increase. So there'll be probably low level breaches or low level incidents where data may have been handled in a way that it shouldn't be, but it's not an area of concern. So the 62% accepted looks quite drastic, but it is of a very small overall total.
Thank you, Chair. In respect of the audit done in respect of this area, can I just say it's very welcome that we're using the ICO benchmarking as the way to do that audit. I think it's a very sensible way to work when we do have a regulatory legal framework to underpin this. And frankly, I wish more organisations would do it that way. I think it's very worthwhile and actually creates far more benefit to not just us as a committee overseeing this, but actually those that actually are responsible for the implementation of any outcomes from that and the way in which it works. So credit to everyone for that. So just thank you on that, Chair.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Thank you, Gurmeet. I guess the question about ransomware, if people are working more from home, can your laptop be infected and then transmitted through the line into the combined authority system?
What we can give assurance to, and this is an area that has been considered, obviously, with the increase in home working. The combined authority, the IT team, employ obviously mechanisms to stop ransomware and packages, which are deployed across all combined authority laptops. No remote device is allowed to access the combined authority servers and network unless it is fully encrypted and has that software in place. So we have that assurance. What we have done since the increase in home working is to also additionally put in place two-factor authentication. So that is where on a routine basis, users are required to enter a random code which is delivered to their phone as a double check to make sure it is them. I've spoken to our cybersecurity specialist, and he has informed me that the monitoring that the security systems provide against ransomware is detecting the same levels as it would have been previously, and assurance has been sought from the IT security team that there is no impact on that from the increase in home working.
Thank you.
Sounds right.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to understand, because there's a 62% looks quite high, though maybe a less impact. But I just thought came to the mind at that time. Is the training process in place? Because it's human error. It has to be addressed through the training. So is there a process for that to follow up?
Yes, there is. As with all breaches, there's a process by which they're managed, and the first important thing is to assess that there's no risks to any data subjects, and if there is, that needs to be addressed by us. With all breaches, there is learning that we look to take from them. So the individual team or officers where that may have happened to, it's discussed with them in terms of how it happened, what can be put in place to prevent it. Can there be any additional procedural checks and balances that can be put in place to ensure it doesn't repeat? The one thing I would say is that with the breaches that we've seen, there hasn't been a pattern. So we've not seen any instance where this is regularly happening in that area. So it has been a case of dealing with it at a localized level rather than sort of seeing that actually we have a major fault area, which is a risk area. But absolutely, all risks are assessed, and learning and assessment as to ensuring it doesn't happen again is put into place.
Any other questions? Thank you. Gomez, is there anything else you want to say?
No, Chair, there's nothing else from me.
Thank you. And Sandra, is there anything you want to say in relation to what's come up under Gomez's presentation?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can I please just check, is everybody happy to sign off on this year's GDPR report? A recommendation going forward is that we continue to have an annual report, probably this time of the year, but that the DPO has the opportunity to bring back to the ARAC more urgently than that if he feels that there are some issues or failures that are coming up. Would the committee be happy to continue with that basis?
Agreed.
Yes, Chair.
Mark, are you happy with that?
Yeah, no.
So, can I be clear? Annual update, as we have, but you have the route through to the chair of ARAC and to ARAC if there are concerns that are emerging that you want to bring to ARAC's attention that are within the 12-month cycle.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the committee for your support on that.
Okay, Satish, are you happy with that?
Yes, no, that's fine. That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, we have a subject that we approved at the last meeting, but we couldn't finalise because we weren't quorate. We're not quorate still. So, Fiona, what I'm suggesting is that we take as read that we have signed that off, but we weren't quorate. There's no point in discussing it again because we're still not quorate. Can I leave it for Satish and Mark as the new chair to discuss how that should go forward in the future, whether we need to bring it back to a quorate meeting? We can't advance it any further other than me writing a recommendation to the board. So Satish, could you consider with Fiona how you want to take this forward? There's no point having the agenda item now. Absolutely. And I'm sorry to have held you here, but I was rather hoping somebody might arrive in a rush at the last moment, but they haven't.
No problem. Right. Thank you, Chair.
It's a committee. I'm not raising it again. We've discussed it fully. We're not quorate, so we can't approve it. Okay, so it's over to Satish and Mark to decide how they take it forward in the future. That means that we move on to the big show, which is the annual accounts. Now, let me summarise where I believe we're at. We're not quorate, so we cannot approve the accounts. But I'm going to run this session as if we were quorate, because what is allowed to us is that we can make a recommendation to the board, which would be that the board would approve. We cannot approve on our own. And so unless Satish or Linda tell me otherwise, we'll have the discussion, we'll raise any questions that we've got, we'll challenge the auditors on anything that we want to challenge. And then depending on what comes out of that discussion, I will write to the board, or I, Mark, will write to the board and essentially give a recommendation for the board because the approval would have to go to them. Satish, is that acceptable to you?
Yes, that's fine. I would suggest that the letter is from yourself as opposed to Mark.
I noticed a sigh of relief. So that's fine. That's important. You have to. Okay, so that's where we're at. The majority of the discussion I would like, and certainly the priority to the discussion, I would like to be on the two audit reports. That's the external audit reports that feed into the annual accounts. I've been through the annual accounts with Louise yesterday to check what had changed from the papers we'd seen before, and they're relatively marginal changes. The changes of names regarding the chief executive and Satish in terms of the monitoring officer, a couple of minor changes to the annual governance statement, nothing of any great significance. There is one significant change which is the regarding the, remind me what the acronym is. The management, what's movement in reserve? Movement. There's one change that the external auditors has requested, and the way that's been dealt with, and Grant will pick it up and Linda can comment on it in a minute, is that a supplementary paper will be submitted instead of circulating to everybody a full rewrite. It affects the annual accounts in a fairly limited fashion, but the external auditors insisted on this change being made. I've seen it. I'm content that from an audit point of view that change is acceptable. It is relatively minor, and that the decision not to recirculate the whole report and accounts was an appropriate and proportionate way of dealing with it. So what I'd like to do is to say to you that the annual accounts are what we have seen, what ARAC, I mean not everybody here, has seen previously and has approved, and leave it open to Grant Thornton and I hope a representative of BDO who may well be on screen or here. We have a curious situation, which is our external auditor is Grant Thornton, represented by Grant Patterson, no relation. And I think you get the ball first, Grant. And one of the things I'd like you to explain to ARAC is the order in which the approval of the two external audits occurs, because at the moment, the papers I've seen suggest that MML are waiting for you, but you're also waiting for MML.
Right, okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll start from around. I'm also joined by Helen Linton, who's the audit manager on the audit as well. In terms of where we are in respect of the order of the accounts, my understanding is I thought BDO are in a position to issue their opinion on MML. And therefore, we have actually, as part of our work, reviewed their work. So what we were waiting for as part of the component auditor approach is there are some papers that they need to send to us in terms of the completion statement and subsequent events. And we are awaiting that confirmation from themselves. So I know last year there were discussions between ourselves and BDO in respect of going concern issues they had in respect of MML and in relation to the pandemic and the cash flows. I'm not aware that those are in existence for this year, and my understanding is that MML has actually received, I think, a bigger grant. So in terms of what would need to happen is, yes, I do need those final assurances from BDO. And I think last year they did require additional assurances from Linda as Section 151 in respect of, I suppose, the partner, the arrangement, or I suppose the covenant between the parent and the company, but they are hardwired into the agreement. So it has to happen. That I suppose I'm just waiting for those final component auditor documents from BDO in relation to that before I could issue my opinion.
Okay, let me stop you there. I noticed the brand BDO has just popped up on the screen. Can I just check, and I'm sorry, my eyesight's not good enough to read the name. Can I just check, is that the BDO's understanding? Because reading the audit papers that were attached, you were waiting for confirmation from Grant Thornton before you could issue your component, your audit. Can you just explain to me where you sit on this?
Yeah, so I thought I'd just add on to what Grant has said. So from a BDO perspective, when we look at Midland Metro, we do our audit at 2 levels. Now, one of those levels is our work so that we can feed into what Grant Thornton will issue as their opinion on the group accounts. So we call that, for simplicity's sake, the group audit. And then the second level of the audit that we perform is the entity level audit. And that's for the purposes of the statutory accounts. So to better explain it, for the group audit itself, we report to a higher materiality. We receive instructions from Grant Thornton on the level of work they require us to do for them to be comfortable to issue their opinion. And then from an entity level, so for the group level side of the audit, Grant Thornton are waiting for us to report to them. And I expect that to happen sometime this afternoon. So they'll be in a position to sign off the West Midlands Combined Authority accounts. The second level, which is the statutory audit, is the entity level audit, and it's done for statutory purposes, is to a much lower materiality. For that purpose, BDO require the West Midlands Combined Authority accounts for us to sign off on a clean opinion from a going concern perspective. The reason for that is because MML obtains support from the Combined Authority. So we want to gain comfort that the WMCA is in a position to be able to do so in terms of supporting MML. So we will review the audit report to see that it is clean, and then we'll be able to sign off from a statutory perspective. So in terms of order of things, is BDO reports to Grant Thornton from a group level to say, we've done the work you required us to do for your group audit opinion. Then Grant Thornton will sign off their opinion on the Combined Authority. Once they've signed off, we'll get leverage from that for us to be able to sign off the statutory accounts for Midland Metro. I hope that clarifies the answer to the question.
Okay, with the honourable exception of Mark, who will absolutely understand every word, for colleagues here, in simple terms, I believe what this is saying is that BDO for MML need to take comfort that WMCA can stand behind MML in terms of making sure that MML is a going concern. The words may not be entirely right. And therefore the comfort that is being sought in order for MML to be signed off, that last part, is the Combined Authority accounts. Is that roughly right in an amateurish fashion?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, all right. Anybody got any questions around that? Because otherwise it's a little on the convoluted side. Any questions on that? Okay, so Grant, you have the ball. I can see how this can unfold now. You want to talk us through the findings and what's going to happen?
Right, thank you, Chair. I will try and, as I walk you through the findings, in terms of where we are. I mean, you have the report in front of you, but I'm probably just going to start off with with what is not in the report, which is, as you alluded to, is the paper that will be circulated subsequently. And just probably the background to that in relation to where we are on the audit. There will be, I mean, just to give the Dose Charter Governance or the Audit Committee or ARAC some assurance, is the adjustments, as you have alluded to, do not impact upon the resources available to the combined authority. They are, in a way, they are disclosure accounts. They will make some material movements within the CIS and the movement and reserve statement, and within the expenditure and funding analysis. But it doesn't change the overall bottom line figure, i.e. what you were reporting as your surplus and deficit on provision of services. So it doesn't affect the overall resources available to the combined authority. And the reasons why this has come up late in the audit, and we do recognise that. I mean, part of that is part of our ongoing commitment to quality, and we've been updating our own tools in respect of looking at account checkers and looking at what we call a MERS checker. And looking for the consistency within the financial statements, and that does link into, I mean, as alluded to now, the overall pressures that the local government sector is under in terms of revenue resources, and making sure that the reserve levels, I suppose, in that way are appropriately reported within the financial statement. So we've identified, in a way, two issues with that. There's one in respect of you received revenue grants that you appropriately put through your cost of services, but you didn't spend all of the grants in the year. So what you would therefore do effectively is then take the unspent amount into what we call earmark reserves. However, what you did do was use a statutory sort of funding reversal to get to the position originally when we found that in the accounts, and that's what our checker sort of threw out and said that doesn't look quite right. And therefore the accounts will be adjusted for that. It does affect the prior year as well. It was 9.3 in this year, and it was £16 million last year. So those figures will go through, and that's when you see the paper, that's where it looks at the changes in the earmark reserves. But again, it doesn't change the overall resources available to the combined authority. And the second one was in relation to the way you presented, I suppose, what we would say the expenditure funding analysis and the MERS. This is quite technical, but in terms of that, you report in the way that you would report internally in respect of how do you manage the authority in terms of the general fund reserve, and you manage that, I suppose, on the balance of the unallocated element, because that's the critical bit for you in terms of which will fluctuate most, if you know what I mean, and that's sort of, I suppose, in the way is your buffer effectively. So that's critical to you as the way that you run yourselves. But the statutory general fund includes that balance plus the earmark reserves, and the code of accounting practice is geared from the total being in the accounts. So what we have asked is that there's an additional table being added into the accounts, and an additional column that just shows the total reserves that are available, as well as just the unallocated general fund reserve. So in a way, it's a big disclosure change, but it's I would say to help readers of the accounts. I think that might be a discussion point around whether the expenditure and funding analysis, it is meant to help readers of the accounts get through the complexity of local government. But we're therefore, in terms of the code, and because they're material numbers, as you alluded to, we have requested that they do get changed within the statutory account. So that's the main primary change within that's not in our audit findings report. We will update the audit findings report for that and then circulate it ahead of final signing. So.
Can I just stop you a second? Lens FD, do you wish to just comment on what's happened there?
Yeah, I suppose just a couple of things to note. I mean, I suppose we're disappointed that this has been notified so late to us, and actually it's an amendment that we've been doing it like this for presenting it like this for many years, and so it's something new that's just come up. But actually, as Grant said there, it is presentational. It's not affecting the substance of the accounts. And essentially, it's not affecting that. We're looking here for a true and fair view of the accounts, and does it reflect the activity of the combined authority? And this is a technical presentation between reserves, really, which is not affecting the substance of what we're presenting today.
Are you happy with that as a summary, Grant?
Yes, I am, Chair. I mean, I just as an auditor, I have to audit against the accounting code and the accounting standards. So that's why we've raised it. We do appreciate it has come late in the audit. We have been working on that, and I think I'll come on to probably where we are on the audit overall a bit later on. But yes, I'm happy with that as a summary, Chair. So.
Okay, on you go then.
Okay. The other matter, just to bring to your attention, I just bring it to your attention now, is in terms of the pension fund. We have received information from the pension fund auditor that there is going to be a £90 million unadjusted misstatement within the pension fund accounts in relation to the timing of the valuation of assets. Just for the committee's assurance, there isn't an issue around the controls in place at the pension fund. This is effectively a timing difference between when they put their accounts together and when the final valuations come in. Now, materiality on the pension fund is based upon the assets. It's £165 million, so the pension fund isn't proposing to adjust for that. Your share of that potential unadjusted misstatement will be 1.5 million, so that isn't material to you. So we're not expecting a change to the accounts, but I just need to bring it to your attention as an unadjusted misstatement. So that's the other thing that's not in our audit findings report overall, and doesn't affect the overall accounts, and we're not expecting an adjustment as a result of that. So I suppose that sort of the new information. In terms of where we are more generally, in terms of if you look at the audit findings report, I suppose that does reflect upon I think that what Linda was saying earlier, and then also that is there aren't any significant findings in the report that amend the financial statements in relation to that. There has been a change to our materiality because of the increased expenditure at the authority in the year, primarily based around adult education services, as you heard to earlier, and also the fact of the capital spend in relation to the investment programme. So that did move the overall expenditure significantly. From our perspective as auditors, we categorise audits. You're now into what we call category 2 audit because your gross spend's over £500 million. And that did bring in some more audit requirements and audit testing requirements, and we have to cap materiality as well. So, but it has increased from last year from our plan. So I'm just informing you that there was an increase in the overall materiality as part of our audit plan. And that's shown, I think, on page 118 of your pack and on page 6 of our report as it is in there. As Linda has alluded to and as you discussed, there is currently one unadjusted misstatement in there in relation to the impairment of the track, and we would be looking for ARAC to approve management's proposal not to adjust for that on the basis of materiality. Our overall materiality is approaching 8 million. This is 5.5 million, so I'm satisfied it won't lead to a true and fair impact upon upon the financial statement. It's not adjusted for, but we do need ARAC's board's approval, I suppose, in terms of that, and that comes through the letter of representation. So that's the one unadjusted misstatement within the audit findings report.
Grant, before you go on,
yeah.
Because it covers a subject that came up a bit earlier, I just want to quickly ask Linda to identify, is that related to the point that was made earlier regarding the issues of the track? I think for fairness, so that because this was a question and an issue, can you just advise what that just because we're not recognising it because materiality doesn't mean that it's not being treated very seriously?
Absolutely. So as we referred to earlier, yes, there would be a technical adjustment in the accounts because of impairment of the asset as at the 31st of March. It wouldn't have had an impact on the actual accounts themselves, but yes, there is clearly a financial consequence to that, which we have had to fund into this financial year, and that is being picked up as part of this independent investigation.
Can I just quickly check? Are we all happy that actually the fact that we're not recognising it in the accounts because it's below the level of materiality, that we accept that we're still taking very seriously the issue of the tracks? Is everybody happy with that? Good. Okay. Thank you. On you go.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I suppose that then brings us on, as I'm going through the sort of main report itself now, in relation to that. So other matters that as we've gone through, we did in terms of the significant risk we brought to your attention, were around management override controls in relation to journals. None of our testing or our issues came out of that, so there's no issues for you to report there. We've also looked at whether we did rebut the risk of fraud and revenue recognition, including expenditure, because there's a new audit practice note 10. Again, we've undertaken work there and there's no issues to bring to your attention as a matter of that. So I'm just trying to get back to the right page in the accounts, if I can find it. So it's 118, sorry. So in those issues, the other significant risk was around the valuation of the pension fund net liability. So that's on page 121 of your pack. We've undertaken our work on that, and as I say, whilst I'm still, and this is where I have to write to myself in relation to that I am the auditor of West Midlands Pension Fund. We're close to finalising that audit, subject to there are some final reviews from the firm's internal quality team that we just need to resolve. But we have informed, or I have informed myself as the auditor of the likely content of that letter to enable us to get to there. So subject to that 1.5 million I mentioned earlier, we're satisfied that the net pensions liability is fairly stated within the financial statements. And as part of that, we have challenged the assumptions used by the actuary as in prior years, and assessed the completeness of information that's provided to the actuary in order for them to use the IAS 19 statements. So we're satisfied that it's fairly stated within the financial statements. On page 122, we talk about the group audit, and we've just gone through that where we are on that in relation to the audit. We have reviewed both Cooper Paris and BDO's actual audit work, and we're satisfied with that. As I say, we're just waiting for the final documentation now from BDO so that we can sign off on the group audit. On page 123, I go into a bit more detail around the assumptions that underpin the net pension liability. I wouldn't propose to walk you through that, but I will if you so wish. And then also on page 124, we mentioned key estimates and judgments. Most of the capital expenditure and assets held by the combined authority is in infrastructure, and they're at cost. But the one element, I suppose, is the building you're sitting in that is at market value. So it's not material to us, but we have looked at the assumptions used by the valuer to make sure about that, and we're nothing to report to you in respect of that. I think page 125 is probably a finding, and I think we did have this conversation to a certain degree last year around how long audits are taking, and we're still taking longer as a firm, and I think that the sector as a whole, overall audits when working remotely, are taking longer in relation to that. So, but I think what we have found this year is we were working with the team last year, and there's a new chart of accounts to be put in place. We have found that, I suppose, the audit trails that we're using, because we undertake a primarily substantive audit approach rather than writing on systems, it has taken quite a long time this year, and Helen might come in a little bit and explain in a bit more details around where we are. But we have found that sort of tracking it down from the general ledger and then basically where the codes get split and then get put into the financial statements, it does take us quite a long time to get to, I suppose, at a transactional level, which is where we test that. And therefore the audit, and part of the reason the audit has taken so long for this year, is linked into that, and we have been having ongoing discussions with both finance around how we can look to improve that, and we do appreciate the hard work being put in by the finance team to help us get the assurance we need, and we have agreed that we would look to review a full review, a sort of joint review of the process alongside management to see how we can improve it for next year, and whether, as part of going back hopefully to more normal audit cycles, we can bring some of our testing forward earlier in the calendar year to take that. So I think that's probably one of the key findings from this, and we've made a recommendation around that going forward. I'll quickly go for, in terms of that, there are no other matters I need to communicate, but you have the letter of representation in front of you. In respect to going concern, we covered that on page 127. Slight change this year, as we said, I think in planning, that practice note 10, which is the public sector one, has now looked at generally going concern now, and the public sector has moved to looking about service provision, and therefore we've gone through about whether the services that you would, our focus has been on services you provide will continue provided if you cease to exist. Well, we're satisfied that they were provided before you were there, and if you came after. I'm not suggesting you will not be here for a long period of time, but that's the criteria we effectively go through. We haven't got any issues to report to you around going concern, which will then feed hopefully back into BDO's accounts. We looked at the other information, which the annual governance statement and narrative report, and we're satisfied with those. Nothing to report there. Probably one thing to bring to your attention is whole of government accounts. There's been a delay in the whole of government accounts nationally, and in the sense of we're not expecting the data returns to now be available more towards December. So that means we can't certify your audit closed based upon, because we would need to undertake whole of government accounts review. And now you've tipped into being over £500 million. There will be more extensive procedures to undertake as a result of that. And I'd have to keep you informed about when that guidance for us comes out. And the other reason I'll look at value for money in the final steps on page 130 and 129. As we've said in the audit plan, we identified a focus area for our areas where there might be a risk of significant weakness, and that was around financial sustainability. We have done quite a lot of work in this area already to date. We're not in a position to formally conclude our work, but I'm satisfied that there's no risk of a significant weakness that we need to report immediately. And the NAO has changed the timelines for this, that we have to issue our detailed report within 3 months of the completion of the audit. So we'll be looking to do that, well, I'll say by the end of December, but hopefully a little bit earlier than that to the next audit and risk committee. But again, because of that, I can't certify the audit closed. And then finally, just to say that we do remain independent of yourselves, but just to highlight that another part of the firm does do work for DFT in relation to grants paid to yourselves, and also the fact that actually a member or a former chair of one of your task force has joined Grant Thornton post year end, but because of that, effectively that individual no longer is associated with the combined authority. We are reporting that there, and has had no input to the audit. So we're just reporting that the way we've mitigated that potential risk there as well, as part of our audit. And I propose to stop there. As I say, the appendix has got the recommendation around going forward, and the adjusted and unadjusted misstatements, which I've spoken to. I don't know unless Helen's got anything particularly more to add. I'll stop there and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Grant. Helen, there's nothing.
No, Chair, there's nothing from me, although obviously happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I just check, have colleagues got any questions they wish to raise about the external auditor's report on the accounts? Or indeed on the accounts? Let me just check over here, Ron.
Probably just a cheeky question, Grant, is although you mentioned in that there's a conflict of perceived conflict of interest that's addressed. Just following on from there, you are the auditor of a pension fund, and also you have to write yourself. So is there any conflict of interest in that sense? I'm just being cheeky. That's what I thought very clear.
No, it's not a cheeky question. It's a relevant question. I think these arrangements exist. It's just by the nature of where the appointments come in. I'm in terms of, I suppose, the assurances that I provide as pension fund auditor, they're fairly factual. They are actually sort of saying that yes, the information that you provided to the fund that then gets passed on to the actuary is accurate. So I'm not making judgments or anything like that in that relation to the pension fund. And I suppose the pension fund is big enough, and it covers all of the combined, I suppose, all of the West Midlands Mets, if you know what I mean. So so yeah, we do take. I'm comfortable that I'm independent in that sense, in terms of the what I'm providing you with is a fairly factual letter. It is sort of an arrangement that is is across the country effectively, just by the nature of where pension funds sit. But I'm satisfied that I do remain sufficiently independent and don't have a conflict in that, in the information that I suppose I provide myself with, in that sense. And also the pension fund itself actually is subject to what we call a quality, an EQCR quality reviewer as well, who can pick up on where if they feel that I'm not acted independently as well.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Hello there. Thank you.
Can I ask a question around the supplementary agenda that was submitted?
Yep.
How much work are you doing on top of what you did for 2020? What I'm saying is, if you compare to the amount of work you did for 2020 and the amount of work you're doing for 2021, percentage-wise, how much work are you doing on top of 2020?
I mean, I'll start, and Helen's happy to come in this. I mean, it's difficult to give a sort of absolute number, but as I say, because in terms of our substantive approach and the way that our methodology operates, reducing materiality, and the increase, and I suppose we did put in a plan around the additional work we have to do around estimates. Our sample sizes have increased this year significantly. And also, I suppose, in the way that does link into through the government support you get through grants, etc., those have increased. So we have undertaken a significant amount of, I suppose, more testing. Our journals approach has also changed this year in response to regulator, because the FRC regulates us, comments on our approach, and we've used a new approach called inflow. That's increased the number of journals we need to test as well. So I think that's probably, I think may have doubled actually the number of journals we've tested this year. So, and there's been a significant increase in the actual sample sizes that we've undertaken. So there has been a significant, I suppose, increase in the amount of testing that we've had to undertake, and that's actually been ramping up over a number of years. It's not just this year. I'm not sure I can put an absolute percentage and say it's 5, 10, 20, 30% around that, but it is a significantly more increase for this year. I don't know if Helen's got more observations on that as well. So.
Yeah, Grant, I'm happy to come in. I suppose just for members' sort of knowledge, in terms of where we were in terms of testing, probably last year our sample sizes were probably around the sort of 25-30 transactions per sort of sample size that we are looking at. We're now heading generally towards the 60 mark, so sort of almost doubling the amount of transactions we are testing. I think. And what it does come back to is the complexity of you as an organisation. So as you have grown and continued to grow and take on those new functions, you've, as internal audit have reported on today, you've had that, the adult education. There is a level of complexity around how that is controlled and how that is managed. And in terms of getting at the sort of nature and substance of those transactions, is actually a very complicated audit trail. So when you add to that the sort of level of additional sampling that we're doing, because your materiality has come down as being capped, we are looking at a substantial amount of additional work compared to what we have done in prior years. I suppose the other element to consider as well is the additional work that the VFM code has brought in. And again, that's something that has been referenced in the plan. We've not talked about it probably a lot today because we've been focused purely in terms of the accounts, but that additional work around the VFM code, which I know Louise will probably certainly testify to in terms of the amount of additional information we've been asking for around that as well, has had a substantial impact on the amount of work that we've had to do as auditors.
Thank you. Answer.
Yeah, I'm just comparing the costs, audit costs from last year to this year. I think they've gone up by a third. So I guess that probably explains it.
Can I just check with Linda? Are you happy with are you content with the amount of work that's had to go in compared to the price that we're having to pay for the audit? 40.
Yes, I am. Yes, agreed that fee with Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just probably on the fees. I mean, we have sort of agreed that with Linda, and as usual, it is still subject to final PSAA sign off as well. I think probably for members, just to say, the level of fee increase is consistent with our client base, if you know what I mean. So it reflects that there's an increasing across, you know, and there are some ups and downs depending on risk approach, but it is overall consistent with what we're applying to all of our client base this year, and a lot of that reflects as that came out of the Redmond review, etc., around expectations on auditors around those areas.
Can I ask you? You mentioned about value for money. Who does the value for money on this cost for audit increase?
I suppose in a way, because I mean, I think that in that way, that's where, as you're part of, I should probably pass over to Linda, but I mean, my view would be that PSAA, because you've gone through that tender process, effectively are challenging all of the audit firms in respect of that around whether they believe that the fee variations proposed are reasonable and proportionate and I suppose consistent. So I suppose in that way, it's PSAA are doing that sort of helicopter view across the sector. We clearly discussed that individually with Linda as your section 151. You know, and take that forward. But I suppose from your perspective, it's PSAA through that contractual arrangement should be taking the helicopter view on whether those fee variations are reasonable based upon, I suppose, the evidence that we put through the audit findings report, audit plan, etc.
I think in summary, because we're part of a buying group, that is a consistent approach that's been taken across all those in the buying group, which is essentially most if not all of the local authorities.
Yeah.
But bearing in mind that I know we have a fairly combative finance director in terms of fees, and I think you've declared you're reasonably content with where things are.
Sorry, mic seems to be coming on, but yeah, yes, I am. So clearly, I take my assurance from the PSAA, but I also then obviously benchmark the requests from Grant around actually our fellow the rises that the audit firms may be asking both locally within the West Midlands, because we're part of that regional buying group, but also benchmark that with the level and scope of activity of the other mayoral combined authorities. So I am reasonably content in terms of the value for money on this year's fee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so any other questions?
Can I just ask Grant, what's the difference between a helicopter view and a bird's eye view?
Ask the citizens.
I have no idea is the answer to that question.
I would say that the helicopter costs us a lot more money. Alan.
And we'll have fuel supplied.
Mine is just a comment really, to thank both internal and external audit for their comments and their reports, because it's becoming clear, I think, to audit committee, the complexity and the extra work we're asking of our auditors, especially our external auditors, who we expect more and more each year. And as government legislation changes, audit changes, then we're asking them to be even thorougher than they've been in the past, especially where value for money comes in and all the other checks. So I think we need to record that I think that I'm glad we've still got auditors left, because we know there's a shortage. I don't go away just yet, Grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Oh, there is one thing on that, Chair, that I may have to rotate off actually, because I've done 5 years with you now, so we are looking at that now. So I may well be disappearing, but Helen will be staying with you.
All right, thank you, Ram.
Just follow up from what Alan said. Actually, it's just a thinking further. I'm not sure, Linda. Are we opting in, or when our contract is due with the Grant Thornton? Is it time to? Because there's a advice from PSAA.
I can come back to that in a minute.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Yeah.
Linda.
I just wanted to not only thank the auditors as you've done there, but also I wanted to just sort of bring it back round and actually thank the finance team really. I think despite the conversation here and the fact that we've had these few late issues raised, albeit that they're not affecting the substance of the accounts or the bottom line. What we have achieved is an unqualified audit in a space where, as we've noted here, the complexity of how the combined authority is evolving, and the role, the scale of activity, and the role that we're undertaking. So I think we need to recognise the hard work of the finance team as part of that. We clearly recognise that actually, all audit firms have had some difficulties during this pandemic around resourcing and planning for their audits, to deliver all of the public sector audits nationally. Just to assure the committee that I meet with Grant and Helen very regularly to talk around the scale of activity and what's happening and the forward plan for the combined authority and where we may or may not be heading. And I think just to note that we will having a conversation to look at how do we better plan next year's audit in terms of its effectiveness in its delivery for next year, so that we don't hopefully get these sort of late issues coming up again.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to bring this discussion to a hold, to a completion. Just quickly checking there's no other points. Then I think before us we have Annex E, which is I think from page 142 in the pack to 144. Can I have everybody's approval? It's the management letter of representation that on behalf of ARAC I can sign that. Yes, you should. Thank you. And then we also have a letter to me, or to ARAC if you like, regarding the delay for the value for money. Now, this was something that Grant talked about earlier. So typically you would get your value for money audits and your annual accounts at the same time. This year we're going to be asked to sign off, or effectively approve the annual accounts and recommend them to the board, and the value for money part of the annual accounts will then be complete before the end of December. And subject to everybody's agreement, I'd like us minuting that we have received that letter in respect to the delayed value for money work and accept that that is now a two-stage process. And just to be clear, what we are planning to do is that you have, I am asking you to authorise me to see the final approved accounts from Grant Thornton and then BDO and then Grant Thornton again, which will allow me to write to the Mayor and to the board as a delegated authority saying that we've been through the process, and the final paperwork that will be signed off, I think later today or tomorrow, will then be submitted for me, not to approve because we're not quorus, but to make a recommendation to the board. Are you all content that I do this? Yeah. Right. I did try to do a runner on that one. I handed it to Mark, but I'm told that I can't, and I will have to sign those off in the next 24, 48 hours. Are you all happy with that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so Grant and BDO, I leave you to run the process and then direct to me the paperwork that is your final paperwork, which I will then submit to the board with a recommendation.
Yeah, Chair, the only thought that's come to my head right now is if the board, if your understanding is 19th of November, is it? We normally ask for letter of representation to be as close to our sign off as possible. So it may well be in your letter to the board, you need to say you're happy with letter of representation, and maybe someone else will need to sign it. If you know, if confirmation from the auditors that there's no significant changes to their report. Just trying to think how that might work out in terms of that. But
I'm very happy to make that
that's the end of what I've got really.
I'm happy to make that part of the recommendation to the board. Linda?
Yeah, so if I could just clarify, so it will need the signing, so David will be able to sign and recommend to the board in November, but obviously it will need to be the chair at the point of board approval in November that confirms all events are considered at the date of signing. So it will need to be, because we're not quorum today, it will need final sort of sign off by Mark, but you can actually recommend to the board.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. So we will manage the process. We will take as accepted that we are happy with the explanations being given. We've got a two-stage process, which could end up being like a 4 or 5 stage process, and that between myself, Linda, Mark, and Satish, we will then manage the process. I will write to the board, I hope, tomorrow or the day after, making recommendations, I will obviously involve Mark and advise that Mark will neatly pick up the baton and beyond that. Mark can always reach me if need be. So we're happy with that as a process, and we will minute accordingly. I think we need to be fairly careful about the minutes of that. So the sooner we can get that section of the minutes just through to myself, Linda, and actually also to Mark, so that we're content with what we've agreed. All right, thank you very much. So moving on, I now need to invite any member of the press, any member of the meeting that is not part of the combined authority to leave. Anybody planning to leave?